Welcome to the Empowered Flow podcast. I'm Tris Alexandra, holistic clinical nutritionist, women's health and menstrual cycle educator, and mama. Join me and experts in nutrition, fitness, mindset, and holistic healing as we explore conversations to open your mind to a different way of thinking on all things women's health, hormones, periods, cyclical living, and fertility. Whether you're seeking knowledge, inspiration, or a supportive community, you've found your tribe. Let's dive in. Hey friends, it's Tris here for a solo episode, and I'm going to talk to you all about preconception nutrition. So continuing on with the fertility, pregnancy, postpartum series that I'm doing, and bear with me if you're not in that phase of life because the whole podcast is not going to be about that. But I wanted to specifically talk about preconception nutrition today. There is other factors that we take into consideration for preconception care, so things like movement, lifestyle, stress management, but I really want to focus predominantly on nutrition for this episode. Why we do it, the aims of preconception care, and changing our nutrition in the preconception and pregnancy phase of life, how long we should do it for. I want to talk about testing, supplementation, and a few other things as well. So strap in. Now, I guess I want to start with why. Why is preconception care so important? And what the biggest part of it comes down to is that our food or our nutrition and our environment influences the genetic expression of not only our baby, but our baby's baby. So if you think about it, if you are growing a baby inside of you, inside that baby is also the sperm and eggs of their potential future children that are being developed in there as well. So preconception nutrition or preconception care really has a multi-generational impact, and it means we have the power to really transform the health of future generations by what we do in the preconception, pregnancy and postpartum period. Now, what happens is our lifestyle, our environment, our nutrition, things like environmental toxin exposure, the nutrients we get in from our food, our stress, our movement, all of those kind of things influence epigenetic expression. So it's influencing genes being switched on and off, also sometimes referred to as gene expression. And so what that really means is that genes can be turned on and off, which means that it influences proteins that are produced as a result without actually changing our DNA. And that can impact the health and disease risk throughout our life. So our preconception period has a massive impact on the health of our baby, as well as ourselves. I guess the other part of preconception care is not just the epigenetic expression and the impact that it has on our future generations, but also on the way that we feel and function throughout pregnancy and postpartum, but also on our fertility, on our ability to fall pregnant. We really want to get ourselves and our body in the best possible position to be able to conceive and have a healthy pregnancy and healthy baby. So if we look at the research, it's shown that the impact of nutrition on our epigenetic response seems to be most influential during the first 1,000 days of life. So that is from conception of the baby until the baby's 2 years old. That's not to say that we can't influence epigenetic expression outside of that time. Absolutely we can. We can all influence our own epigenetic expression now. But studies are just showing that the most influential period in a baby's, a newborn's life is that first 1,000 days of life, which is pretty incredible. So the next thing to talk about really is what are the aims of our preconception care, our preconception nutrition? What are we trying to do? And in no particular order, our focus for preconception care is on improving the egg and sperm health. So yes, it's a 50-50 process. It means guys get on board as well as girls. It really is half of each of us that are going into a baby, but also the egg and sperm needs to be healthy in order to conceive in the first place. We are also aiming to reduce inflammation in the body. Now, we are all exposed to things daily that can impact inflammation in the body. And why that's important is if we have inflammation and oxidative stress, it can damage egg and sperm health. With the female in particular, we are also looking at supporting and improving the vaginal microbiome. So as well as the gut microbiome and the bacteria that resides in the gut, we also have specific bacteria, which differs from the gut, that resides in the vaginal microbiome. That is really important because the vaginal microbiome, the bacteria in there, it influences the pH balance. It influences, cervical mucus quality, which means that it's actually influencing the ability for sperm to travel through the vagina to actually reach an egg for conception. If there's any imbalances in the vaginal microbiome, if there's not enough healthy bacteria, if there's an overgrowth of pathogenic or opportunistic bacteria in there, that can influence our ability to conceive. I will talk about testing later on and when we might consider testing or doing a vaginal microbiome test. The other aim of preconception care is to track our menstrual cycle. Reason for this, there's many reasons to track your cycle. Firstly, it can identify any dysfunction or hormonal imbalances that might be going on. So we can pick that up through signs and symptoms through our menstrual cycle. So whether that be the length of our menstrual cycle, the length of our periods, the flow and color of our period bleed, whether it's other signs and symptoms that happen throughout the menstrual cycle. So tracking can really help us pinpoint that. Throughout tracking, we're also trying to pinpoint and find our fertile window and our ovulation, because the fertile window and our ovulation window is the only time in our cycle that we are able to conceive. We need to ovulate in order to conceive. And just because you have a regular cycle doesn't mean that firstly, I should say that if you're tracking your cycle through an app is not actually very accurate at pinpointing ovulation. It goes by textbook 28-day cycle, ovulating on day 14, which not every woman has in her cycle or does in her cycle. So what we're really trying to work out is actually use the body's signs and symptoms, looking at cervical mucus changes, and I'll talk more about that, but that can really tell us as when we are becoming more fertile and entering that fertile window, our cervical mucus changes and becomes a lot more fertile, and that again allows sperm to travel through the vagina to get to an egg. And then we also want to actually pinpoint when ovulation specifically is happening, because that is the most fertile time around our fertile window. So the fertile window is actually, 6 days of our cycle. Ovulation is a one-time event. It happens, and then after ovulation, the egg survives for 12 to 24 days. If you're wanting to learn more about cycle tracking, syncing your cycle with nutrition, learning how to chart and track your cycle, understanding cervical mucus, using basal body temperature to actually confirm that ovulation has happened, I do have a masterclass on that, Sync Your Cycle masterclass. I'll link that in the show notes as well, so you can have a look into that. But that is going to give you all the details on how to actually effectively track your cycle, and also use nutrition to sync your cycle and support hormonal balance naturally. The other really big part of preconception care is we're looking to identify and address any dysfunction or imbalances in the body. This is both in the male and female, right? So we're looking at nutrition, lifestyle factors that may impair fertility, everything from our diet, exercise and movement, sunlight exposure, environmental toxin exposure, alcohol and drugs, our gut health. We're looking at health history and so much more. And I do this with clients one-on-one, where we really deep dive into their health history, their diet and lifestyle, signs and symptoms and things like that are going on in the body. But we also do it through testing, which I'll talk about. Now, when it comes to diet specifically, there's a few things that we're really aiming to do. I guess the first one is looking at diet quality. So we're looking at a predominantly whole foods diet. So looking at foods that are as close to nature as possible, things that our great-great-grandmothers would have been eating. And that also means like reducing heavily refined, ultra processed foods. We're looking at the balance of the different types of fats we're eating as well. So making sure that we're not, only consuming one type of fat. And then overall, we're looking at reducing things like preservatives, additives, colors, thickeners, gums, all the things that they put into food in our food system that we don't need to be consuming a lot of. Seed oils as well is another one. Now, that can be as simple as looking at different brands of the food products that you buy, because they can differ significantly. If you look at like yogurt or cheese, for example, there are some brands that will add in a lot of, preservatives or gums or thickeners and all sorts of things. And then there are other brands that are yogurt made from whole milk and cultures and not a lot else. So it can make a real difference just comparing the foods that you're eating regularly. Now, when it comes to our nutrition, the other thing we're looking at is macronutrient balance. So are you eating enough protein, carbs, fats, and fiber for your needs? I don't like to overemphasize protein as being the only important thing, but for most of the clients I see, particularly females, although males as well, to be honest, but we're under eating protein because for most females, we don't realize how much protein we need. And macronutrient balance is important not only to get those macronutrients in, but it also impacts our blood sugar balance. And blood sugar balance is so important for our hormones. It means it's regulating insulin, cortisol, our stress hormone, and then that has a downstream effects on our metabolic health and other hormones impacting our fertility as well. Of course, macronutrients are not the only important thing. We are also looking at micronutrients, so vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, polyphenols. There are so many compounds in food, like in whole unprocessed foods, that are so vital for the functioning of everything in our body, including our fertility and the health of our sperm and eggs. And that's why we focus on a predominantly whole foods diet. But there are specific nutrients that we're looking at in the preconception period as well, which I'll talk about. Now, I mentioned I'm going to focus on nutrition, but just touching on the other things we need to look at for preconception care is our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. These things all have a really big impact on our health, but also on our nervous system, so we have a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic being our fight or flight mode, parasympathetic being rest, digest, reproduce. Quite a lot of us are walking around being really sympathetic nervous system dominant. So we're always in that fight or flight mode just because of modern, busy, hectic lifestyles and so many other things. And we're really looking at ways to activate our parasympathetic nervous system. Rest, digest, reproduce. That system is really about safety in the body, and our bodies need to feel safe in order to reproduce. Particularly as females, it can impact our menstrual cycles, our hormonal balance, and our ability to conceive. So that's a really big factor we need to take into account. Stress management, I guess, as we sort of like to call it, is a really big factor in our preconception care, and we need to look at ways that help us to manage stresses in our life, in our body, and also work on that, that mental, emotional, and spiritual health as well. So how long should we be doing preconception care for? I always say it's never too early to start. And that is because an optimally fertile body is an optimally healthy one. So you're going to get the benefits of improving your health and optimizing your health, regardless of how far out from preconception care from trying to conceive that you are. I would say ideally 4 months. If you can give 4 months prior to trying to conceive, that would be good, preferably 6 months or longer. But ideally 4 months. And the reason for that is it takes approximately 100 days for an egg to be fully mature and released at ovulation, and approximately 74 days for sperm to be produced. So that means if you go back the last 3 to 4 months, your nutrition, your lifestyle, during that past 3 to 4 months is going to impact your egg and sperm today. And remember that this is like an ongoing process, right? Now, I also kind of depending on how much time you have, I like to do preconception care in 2 phases. So in an ideal world, I would be doing about 3 months of detox work first, where we're really supporting detoxification pathways, quite significantly, and we would do that well in advance before trying to conceive, because we don't want all of those toxins and things floating around in the body when we're actually in the trying to conceive phase. So I'd be doing that for 3 months, followed by 3 months of dedicated preconception care, when we're really focused on nourishment, replenishing nutrient status, and just continuing to optimize health. So that would be my ideal, but if you can give it 4 months, that would be amazing. So let's talk about testing. I did mention this earlier. Now, testing, I think, is absolutely essential. It can start off with just some basic blood tests that you can get through a GP, and it can be covered by Medicare if you're in Australia. Now, that will give us a really good base and foundation for what is going on in your health, and I think that is absolutely essential for everyone to do. Reason being is you might not have any signs or symptoms of dysfunction, or even if you do, we want to see how that is manifesting at a biological, biochemical level. So what does your nutrient status look like? What do your bloods look like? What do your hormones look like? We can get a lot of information just from general blood tests. What I would suggest personally is having a qualified practitioner review your tests from a functional lens. And what I mean by that is doctors are great at looking at blood tests from a disease perspective. So they're looking at, do things fall outside of a quote unquote normal range, where they can diagnose you with something. Whereas practitioners like clinical nutritionists like myself or naturopaths, we look at things from an optimal and functional lens. So we're not just looking at do your blood tests fall outside of the normal range, but we're actually looking at are they optimal? Because within that those ranges can vary significantly, and we're looking at what's actually optimal within those ranges, but also how does that correlate to your health at the moment? And then we're also looking at, nutrient status, and is your nutrient status actually optimal for entering into that trying to conceive, preconception and pregnancy period? Because what is optimal and what is deficient when it comes to nutrients can vary significantly, and those nutrients are going to have a really big impact on your ability to conceive and have a healthy pregnancy and baby and postpartum period, because there are so many nutrients that get heavily depleted during pregnancy. And of course, that's very normal. So we want to make sure we're going into pregnancy with quite an optimal nutrient status. Now, some of the things, some of the nutrients we'd be looking at would be vitamin D, iron, B12, folate. Sometimes I look at zinc if there's any history of thyroid conditions or autoimmune thyroid conditions. We might also look at iodine as well. When we're looking at iron specifically, we are looking at full iron studies, so not just ferritin, which is our storage form of iron, which sometimes doctors will only test ferritin. It doesn't give us enough information of our iron status. We actually need the full iron studies panel, so ferritin, transferrin saturation, iron, and also hemoglobin. So we need a full blood count to look at how that's actually impacting our red blood cell production. When it comes to testing and blood tests, we're also looking at hormones. So specifically for females, we're looking at things like estrogen, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and progesterone. And if there's any history of or any potential signs and symptoms of hormonal dysfunction, things like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, we might look at some further testing outside of that. So things like testosterone, androstenedione, DHEAS. I also like to look at blood glucose to see how your blood glucose is, any insulin resistance. So we're looking at a fasting glucose and fasting insulin test there, or even a HbA1c, which is like a marker of your blood glucose regulation over a 3-month period. That can give us a lot of information as well. Now, I want to talk about optimal testing conditions, because quite often I have clients that will go and get tested and they haven't been told about specific days in their menstrual cycle, for example, that we should get tested, but also what's actually optimal when it comes to testing conditions, because we really need to be looking at tests and then your history of tests from the perspective of like, were they all taken under the same conditions? So we'd be looking at preferably no exercise in the last 24 to 48 hours before a blood test. Some blood tests require fasting, so our fasting insulin, fasting glucose, are all really important to do fasted. And when we say fasted, we're talking about a 10-hour fasting window overnight. As you start to get above 12 hours of fasting, that can then further impact those test results. So we don't want to be fasting for 16 hours and then going to get a fasting blood test sort of mid-morning. It needs to be first thing in the morning the next day. When it comes to hormones, it's really important that estrogen, FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, LH, which is luteinizing hormone, are done on day 3 of our menstrual cycle. So that is day 3 of a full bleed. Don't count any spotting that might have happened beforehand. And then progesterone needs to be separate. So you actually need to get progesterone on a separate blood test referral slip. Progesterone needs to be tested 7 days after confirmed ovulation, not on day 21, because you might not ovulate on day 14, but we actually need to confirm that ovulation has happened. And that can be done a variety of ways. Tracking basal body temperature is the easiest way to do it. You can also use an OPK, so an ovulation predictor kit, as long as you don't have PCOS. Some women with PCOS, OPKs won't be very accurate. And that is because they're testing for something called luteinizing hormone and the rise in luteinizing hormone at ovulation. And for some women with PCOS, we have high levels of luteinizing hormone throughout the cycle. So just something to be aware of there. Now, outside of our general blood tests, we can also look at functional tests. So these can only be done through a qualified practitioner like a clinical nutritionist or naturopath. Now, one that I would be 100% be doing for males is a sperm analysis. You can actually do a sperm analysis through some doctors and fertility specialists as well, but a sperm analysis is so important. I have a men's health expert on the podcast next week, and he talks about sperm analysis and men's health, men's preconception and fertility care specifically as well. So you can tune into that. For females, we could also look at the vaginal microbiome test, which, like I mentioned, we're looking at the balance of bacteria in the vaginal microbiome because that has such an influence on the ability for sperm to survive and travel through to an egg in order to conceive. If there's been any history of like recurrent thrush, bacterial vaginosis, UTIs, any other signs and symptoms going on, then a vaginal microbiome test would be really important, especially also if there's been a history of miscarriage or pregnancy loss, or an inability to conceive. If you're sort of finding yourself going around in circles and not getting any answers, then I would 100% be looking at a vaginal microbiome test, because it can really be something that we don't have any signs or symptoms of, but the balance of bacteria in there and the pH levels could be completely off and impacting your ability to conceive. There are other functional tests that we can look at as well, just depending on your health history. So things like I would be looking at thyroid testing. Now, the reason why I haven't mentioned thyroid testing in general bloods is doctors generally will only test TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, which is a brain pituitary hormone. We actually need to see a full thyroid panel to know what is going on in the thyroid and whether that is functioning properly. And that is because our thyroid impacts our metabolic health and our reproductive health and our menstrual cycle. So a full thyroid panel would include TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone, and then our actual thyroid hormones, T4, T3, reverse T3, and we would also look at antibodies. So whether there's any autoimmune conditions or any autoimmune susceptibility that is impacting thyroid function. Now, outside of optimizing our diet for our nutrient status, we'd also be looking at supplementation. So really important part of preconception care is really getting in those extra nutrients and specific nutrients for both fertility, for both egg and sperm quality, but also to carry us through pregnancy and postpartum. As an absolute base foundation, I would say a quality prenatal supplement, a quality prenatal multi. I will talk about that in a moment. A omega-3 fish oil with high DHA content. So there are some fish oils that do actually have higher DHA. Depending on your nutrient status, we would possibly be looking at vitamin D supplementation. I also really like magnesium particularly for women's health. And then depending on your health, your age, I also most of the time look at nutrients for optimal egg quality as well. And they could be, you don't need all of these, but they could be anything from CoQ10 or ubiquinol, lipoic, vitamin E, NAC, and they're the main ones I sort of look at. Other supplements we would then be looking at, depending on your needs, would be iron status. So we want to go into pregnancy with an optimal iron status. Just depending on what your test results are, we may supplement prior to conception, or we may hold off and wait until throughout pregnancy. Now, iron is something that I absolutely test in each trimester of pregnancy, so preconception or the start of the first trimester, second trimester, and third trimester, and that's because our iron status will drop through pregnancy. That is a very normal thing to happen. Something really important just to note on that is we need to look at iron test results from the perspective of where you are at in your pregnancy, not comparing you to the quote unquote normal of, men, women, whoever outside of pregnancy, because the status of your iron will change and the range, or what is an optimal and okay range, does actually differ trimester to trimester. Most women will need an iron supplementation at some stage in their pregnancy. And I also like to ensure that the iron supplement is firstly, is not Multifer or Ferrograd, because I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but they are way too high in the amount of iron per tablet that we actually can't absorb through the gut. It, for a lot of women, gives them digestive symptoms like constipation, pain, nausea, because of the type of iron that is used in there, and also because of the amount of iron in there. And it lacks the cofactors that we actually need for iron absorption and iron transport in the body. So I look at a quality iron supplement at a much lower dose that has the cofactors in there. So cofactors like vitamin C and also lactoferrin, which I find significantly improves the absorption of iron, and we've seen that through research as well. Other supplements we might also look at would be probiotics, so potentially for either the gut or the vaginal microbiome. And there can be so many other supplements just depending on your health and your health history as well. So for example, PCOS women, I would often use myo-inositol. If there's any thyroid autoimmunity going on, we would look at myo-inositol and selenium. Yeah, there's definitely some other nutrients there as well, but they're just sort of like the supplement foundations. When it comes to men, I would absolutely be looking at supplementation for men as well. As a base foundation, I would look at a men's prenatal multi. So we're looking at something that has B vitamins in there, and activated B vitamins as well. We're wanting folate, not folic acid. We're also wanting to get zinc, selenium, vitamin D in there, and then considering things like alpha lipoic acid or L-carnitine, and there's some other nutrients as well that can help sperm quality, sperm motility, sperm morphology, so just improving chances of conceiving and improving sperm health there as well. I also want to talk about the difference between prenatal multivitamins and the quality difference and the importance of that. Now, please don't take this to be offended or triggered or feel guilty if you have used, say, like an Elevate. I totally understand it is the most marketed and recommended supplement out there. If you go to any GP and you are pregnant, they will tell you to take Elevate. All right. So this is really just giving you the information so that you can make an informed decision when it comes to your supplementation, like now or in the future. The reason why that I would never recommend Elevate and would always go to a quality practitioner grade supplement, which I understand is coming from a privileged position of both knowledge and working with a practitioner, but just also know that there are quality prenatal supplements out there that you can access without seeing a practitioner. But when it comes to Elevate, firstly, they use a really high dose of folic acid, which is a synthetic form of folate. Folate is naturally occurring in like dark leafy greens and in other food sources. And folic acid requires a number of reactions in the body in order to break it, or in order to convert it into an active form of folate that the body can utilize. Now, quite a lot of people have gene expression or genetic mutation of MTHFR and have a reduced ability to convert folic acid into folate, which means that you won't be getting enough. So I also just 100% think that Mother Nature knows best. And when it comes to any nutrients, if we can source a activated natural form over a synthetic form, it is the way our body is designed to utilize that nutrient as well, and it's going to be a lot better absorbed and utilized by the body. So we're looking for active forms of folate instead of folic acid. The other concern with Elevate is it has a really low dose of vitamin D in there, so 200 IUs. The daily recommendation for preconception pregnancy is at least 1,000 IUs, so we're needing a lot more vitamin D in that. And so most quality prenatal supplements will have 1,000 IUs of vitamin D in there. Elevate doesn't also contain choline. Now, choline is a really important nutrient in the preconception and pregnancy phase, particularly early pregnancy. So choline alongside folate is responsible for the development of the neural tube, but also of cognitive development. So a really important nutrient that we should actually be getting in our prenatal supplement. The other thing I find with Elevate is a lot of women get digestive upset from taking it. It might be nausea, it might be constipation, and that is in part because of the form of iron that's used in it. So they use the form of iron ferrous fumarate, and that is the least tolerable form of iron and can cause things like constipation. I also prefer a prenatal supplement that doesn't contain iron and then supplementing with iron outside of that. Generally because iron and zinc is also in a prenatal, compete for absorption. So I find having a separate iron away from your prenatal supplement is a lot more optimal. So like I said, it really is about the information to help you make an informed decision when it comes to your supplement, not to make you feel guilty because you have taken something else in the past or currently taking. Now, I always preface this by saying that I recommend getting qualified advice from a practitioner when it comes to your supplementation, because there can be a number of nuances. So please don't take this episode as medical advice. As always, it's not personalized advice. It's not medical advice. It really is just for your information to then seek out qualified care. So I hope this episode's been helpful with helping you with your preconception nutrition and preconception care. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to me on Instagram, and I'll link that all in the show notes.
Thanks for joining us on the Empowered Flow podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I'd love you to share it with a friend and take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. Your support means the world and fuels our mission to empower women everywhere. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Tris Alexandra Nutrition. Sending big love. I'll catch you in the next episode.